name is John Abel, Professor of Economics here at Randolph College. And on behalf of the college, I wanted to welcome everybody to Randolph College. I'm glad that you chose to use us for your conference. This is a very important gathering. This is the first of what I'm told will be many future gatherings. I suppose it's unfortunate that we need to have such gatherings, right? But there was this recent kind of ugly exchange in the newspaper. I guess some of you were aware of that, what, 2 or 3 months ago, about, I guess, issues in the park, and City Council had deliberations, and one of those comments kind of caught my attention, and somebody was suggesting, a council member who needs not be named, was suggesting that the solution to the, racial problems in the park and the perceived thuggery and all those kinds of words they use was that we need to be allowed to buy more guns. And I looked at that, I could not believe what I read. And I felt compelled to write a letter to the editor and suggest that, knowing that there might be more guns in the park would make me want to use the park less rather than more. And I tagged on at the end of my letter that we needed more community dialogue. And so I'm just delighted that we've got this opportunity for that community dialogue. My own research in recent years has moved ever more in the direction of looking at Lynchburg itself. It started off looking at food deserts, and then I started, wondering about why do we have food deserts, and why is there hunger? And of course, the answer, at least for careful thinkers, observers, for hunger is that people are poor. And when you look at Lynchburg's poverty numbers, they are dramatically worse than the surrounding counties. They're worse than the state of Virginia. They're worse than the United States. Just in terms of hunger in Lynchburg, the one statistic that just sticks out in my mind, and this, I kind of kept searching deeper and deeper. There was a whole series of newspaper articles that started in 2010 and 11. And they had statistics like, every weekend, 10,000 kids would go home with not enough food to eat. This is statistics from a group called Backpack for Kids' Sake, and 1 in 10 kids were hungry. Then I ran across the statistic, which when I presented it the first time, it was shocking. It said that 58% of children in the Lynchburg City area are eligible for free or reduced price lunches. And the first time I gave a talk, I kind of rounded that from 58 to 60, just sort of because this is a shocking number. Well, the next year when the numbers came out, it was up to 62%. So a 4 percentage point increase in just 2 years. So we've got some work to do here in Lynchburg, and I'm not going to go on and on here, but I'm glad you folks are gathered here to talk about these things and perhaps look for some solutions. So I applaud you coming out here on a rainy day, and I'm off to do a bunch of other community-related things, or else I would stick around. And that's why I'm not dressed in coat and tie, because I'm headed off to Kumbaya and then off to the 5th Street thing, and I hope you have a good day. So.
I'm Ev Heath. I'm a board member for Many Voices, One Community, the Lynchburg Peace Education Center, and Occupy Lynchburg. I'm glad to welcome you here. We're here for a purpose, to find tools for change. And we're all going to work at that, and we're going to work at it together today. We've got 12 wonderful workshops, and all of us will attend some of them, and we'll get to share visions, share commitments, and I hopefully share solidarity. Solidarity is when I ask you to, if you're sitting in back, to move down, sit next to somebody you don't know and introduce yourself, right? Are we all with solidarity? Because this is a problem that we can solve. This is an opportunity for us to start solving it. We'll meet again next year, and we'll continue until racism is no more. And I want to let's introduce the organizer for this conference, our chief leader here, Leslie King.
Thanks, Ev. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see so many of you here. And quickly, what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit briefly about the history of Many Voices, One Community, the Community Dialogue on Race and Racism, for those who may not be familiar with who we are and the work that we've done in the community. And I have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful speaker as well. So, the Community Dialogue, or Many Voices, One Community, which we are leaning toward Many Voices, One Community as the name of our organization at this point. The dialogue, or Many Voices, One Community, the process began in about 2007, and as a result of a number of incidents that occurred in our community, one being the perceived and real issues of gang violence or gangs in our community, and also the reaction to a particular neighborhood, to low-income housing coming in that neighborhood. And the last, but certainly not least, incident would be the death of an African-American male in the custody of white police officers. That would be Clarence Beard. And that spanned the course of a few years. And what happened was the city, as well as community leaders, came together and decided that, something needed to be addressed in terms of race. And they did some research. And some of those city leaders are here in the house today. If you want to just put your hand up so people know who you are. Community leaders that were involved with that? Anybody? Anyone? Okay, there you go, there's one. And so, as a result of that particular issue, they did some research on what's the best process in order to have a discussion or engage the public on issues around race. And what they discovered or identified was the study circle process, and contacted Everyday Democracy, which our keynote speaker this morning is the executive director of, and began planning a community dialogue in Lynchburg on race and racism. And that kicked off in 2008. And at that point, there were, I think, over 1,000 people involved in that initiative. And the study circle process, for those that are not aware, it's a small group of diverse individuals who meet for 6 weeks with 2 trained facilitators, which the dialogue actually trained to meet with the public for 6 weeks to discuss various issues around race and racism, and also identify some ideas, things that could be done in our community. And we had a community forum, or forum. We had a community forum, and the community had an opportunity to come out and vote on those ideas. And as a result of that, the number one idea that came out of the study circles in 2008 was to have a promise net, or opportunities for children in our community to be able to go on to higher education. So that regardless of race or economic situation, that there would be an opportunity for higher education. And as a result of that process, we now have in our community the Beacon of Hope, which is an organization that is sort of their mission, that they're working with high school students to help them and assist them go on to higher education. And so that's one of the successes. That's one of the many successes. And out of the study circles, in addition to that particular group, we had a number of action groups, and they had a number of things that went on. And just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of those particular actions, but there were a number of people involved in that particular initiative. And we learned some lessons from that, and we moved on. And we continue to have study circles. And we've also had forums in the community. We've had meetings on whiteness and privilege. We've had community meetings on racial profiling to determine what types of issues are going on from that perspective. We've also met with a number of organizations in Virginia to provide some information for them about the work that we've done here as well. So in saying that, the work has continued, and at this point, our work is solely community-led. Initially, it was city and community together, but right now, our work is all community-led, and we've made that transition. And so as we look back at some of the lessons that we've learned in the process, one of the things we recognize is that ways in which we can continue this work and engage the public in a meaningful way. We will continue our study circles, but we wanted to do something else to raise the consciousness, not only about race, but poverty and the difference between charity and justice. Recognizing that charity meets a specific need or a symptom of an issue, and justice tends to get at the real problem. And how can we raise awareness, and how can we come together as a community to be able to address those issues? In addition, poverty. And what we have decided to do is we're not conflating poverty and racism, or race, or issues concerning race, which a lot of people tend to do, meaning that it's all about economics. Well, economics plays a big part, but we are still keeping the emphasis on looking at issues concerning race and racial equity, because we think there is a distinction there that is important given the history of our country concerning race and the racial politics that exist. So today, it will be an opportunity for you to hear from various speakers as well as attend workshops in order to continue a dialogue and in order to increase your awareness of these issues. And as Ev also alluded to, this won't be the first time that we have this conference. And we will continue to engage you in this way and bring people together so that we can be that beloved community. We've made some progress, but we still have a long ways to go. All right? Okay. All right, well, I have the pleasure of introducing Martha McCoy, as I said before, who is the Executive Director of Everyday Democracy. Martha McCoy grew up on the mean streets of Calcutta. No, she really didn't. And she's a friend to the blacks. No, she's not. Okay, a little humor in there. I told her I was going to do that. Martha McCoy is the Executive Director of Everyday Democracy. She has made an important contribution to the fields of deliberative democracy, community problem solving, and racial justice. One of her greatest passions is to create close links among these fields. Her early life experiences doing community work in the rural South and in our inner cities fueled her conviction that progressed in all three fields as crucial to strengthening democracy in the United States. Under Martha's leadership, Everyday Democracy has become respected as a national organization that excels in helping local communities build their own capacity to organize large-scale, diverse dialogues for problem solving. Martha and Everyday Democracy have won a number of awards. In June of 1996, Martha was awarded the YWCA of the USA Racial Justice Award for Civil Human Rights. In 1997, the Los Angeles City Council recognized her and the Center for Assisting in the City's ongoing dialogue efforts to build working relationships among the city's many diverse cultures. In 1998, Martha and the organization were invited to work with President Clinton's Initiative on Race, which named Dialogue to Change programs as one of the top 4 best practices in race dialogues. In addition to that, just this year, she was invited to the White House to talk about mental health issues and how we can engage people around the United States around mental health. Martha has delivered speeches to many national and regional organizations on topics of civic engagement, leadership, diversity, democracy, racism, and education reform. And just on a personal note, she is a delight to be around. She's smart, hardworking, and a great leader at what she does. And I just want to welcome her and to the podium. Thanks.
When Leslie told me she was going to start that way, I didn't believe her. But, you know, I've known Leslie long enough that I should have believed her. First, I want to just say what a delight it is to be here. And I just want to thank Leslie King and the whole board of Many Voices, One Community for inviting me to be here. As Leslie said, since 2007, Everyday Democracy, the organization I lead, has been honored to work with Lynchburg in doing the important work of dialogue on racism and moving to community change. And so it's just a real honor to be here. It's also a personal delight for me because I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and on occasion my parents would bring us to Lynchburg, and I probably haven't been back to Lynchburg since I was 15 years old, so this is a little bit of a homecoming for me, so it's great to be here. I want to start today by talking about vision. Recently, I heard Dr. Mae Jemison being interviewed, and she was the first African-American woman to go into space. And Dr. Jemison has this amazing fire inside her belly, which is that she sees out there 100 years from now that we're going to have interstellar spaceflight. And she believes that if she starts working on it right now with a team of people, that by 2012, she started last year, that by 2112, we will have interstellar spaceflight. And I was really impressed when I heard this interview because I could tell Dr. Jemison really believes that by doing this, by going to work every day with her dedicated team, they don't have a lot of money to do what they're doing, but they're continuing to raise money, that they can make this vision happen by 2112. And so I got to thinking, what is it that we care so much about that we could see a vision 100 years out and say, we're going to work toward that vision as if our lives depend on it? What would that look like? So what I'd like you to do with me this morning, right now, is I would like for you to think about, just go inside yourself, close your eyes if it helps, and I want you to think about what is your 100-year vision for building a just community, for what that would look like here in Lynchburg. I want you to think about, what would this community look like? What would it feel like on October the 12th, 2113, when you were here and you were walking down the streets? What would it feel like? What would it be like? Presumably, none of you will be here, unless we have some amazing technology that keeps us alive a lot longer. But what will it be like for your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren? What would it be like if there were racial and economic justice? So I want you to go there in your mind, and I want you to think about these things. How are people relating to each other across color lines? Where do people from different groups go to school? Where do they worship? Where do they shop? Where do they go to work? Are there decent chances for people to have good jobs, to have access to health care, to have good public safety? Go inside the neighborhoods. Go inside the schools. What do they look like? What do they feel like? Do you have a vision in your mind? Do you have something in there that's a vision of the beloved community of Lynchburg? I want you to hold that vision in front of you all day long. And I also want you to hold it in front of you when you leave here today. And if it helps you to journal about it, I encourage you to do that. If it helps you to paint a picture of it, I encourage you to do that. Recently, a group in Columbus, Ohio got together and they painted their vision of what the beloved community in Columbus, Ohio would feel like. I have it on my office door. It's beautiful colors, and across the colors are pictures of people of different ages and different colors and different genders. And the words, equity, opportunity, relationship, inspiration, change, voice. So I want you to think about what that looks like to you and hold it in front of you. What I'm going to do for a little bit here, I'm going to take us through 4 sort of guideposts for getting from here, where we are today, October 12th, 2013, to how to get to October 12th, 2013. And I am not going to bring a recipe because that would be insulting. It's a lot more complex than that. The journey from here to there is a lot more complex. It's sort of like interstellar spaceflight. You know, there's no chartered territory. We have some lessons we can look at. We have some things we can pay attention to along the way. There's increasing numbers of practices and evidence to look at that helps us get from here to there. But I'm going to offer 4 guideposts that we can pay attention to. This is what was supposed to be on the screen when you had your eyes shut. This is you thinking about the beloved community. So the first guidepost we have is that first we have to understand history. And when I say that, I mean we have to understand the complete version of history. How did we get to where we are today? We can't move forward unless we understand how we got here. We have to understand how we got here in terms of poverty, in terms of racism, in terms of social injustices. We have to understand that. So Frederick Douglass, that powerful abolitionist leader, said once that those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. And I often think about him because of his courage and what he's taught us. But I also think about how little time has passed since he said those words to us. So here are some examples. We are only 7 generations away from the Civil War and legal slavery. 7 generations. That's it. We're only 5 generations from the time that W.E.B. Du Bois said that the problem of the 21st century is the problem of the color line. 5 generations. We're only 4 generations since Jim Crow. We have had only 3 generations since we instituted internment camps for Japanese American citizens during World War II. We are only 3 generations since black soldiers came back from World War II and did not have access to the GI Bill, unlike their white counterparts that received the GI Bill and were able thus to build the white middle class. That was only 3 generations ago. People who served their country couldn't get those benefits, came back and couldn't get them. We're only 2 generations since the Civil Rights Movement, which was an amazing feat of organizing and education and small groups and large groups and dialogues and citizen teaching, citizen schools going on all around the country. And that movement reminds us that all during those generations that I've been talking about, there were leaders of all colors who were getting together to do something about what they were facing. People were not sitting back, they were doing things. But also, when the civil rights leaders did what they did, they knew that more had to be done. And that was just 2 generations ago. Today, we are seeing what Michelle Alexander has called the new Jim Crow. We see structural realities that have been left by the legacy of the past and that are continuing to be created. We see that race, racial background, and ethnicity are still leading predictors of how we will fare in life in terms of income, in terms of jobs, in terms of wealth accumulation, in terms of educational attainment, in terms of health. Racism is bad for your health. In terms of access to health care, in terms of treatment in the criminal justice system. Those are all still predicted by race and ethnicity far too often. We are facing daunting challenges. And so we have to understand how we got here. The second guidepost we need to pay attention to is that we have to be careful about our language. We need to recognize and confront untruths when they surface, and we need to shine a light on the truth, even when the truth is hard to hear. This can be really hard because some of the lies we've been told have been repeated so often, they kind of wash over us. We don't even realize sometimes that they're lies. And, you know, they don't even seem alarming anymore because we hear them so often. And the truths that get buried, they're not just inconvenient, like Al Gore said. They are downright scary and disturbing. And so a lot of times people run away from them because they can't bear to look at them. So I'm going to give you an example of a ubiquitous lie. We talk about race like it's a real thing. But in actuality, there is no such thing as race. It is a social construct. It's made up by people to subjugate groups of people. It has no basis in science. The only race that we can accurately speak about is the human race. Racism is real. It takes a belief in these so-called biologically distinct groups of people, and it actually says that some groups of people are superior to other groups of people. Michelle Alexander has defined racism as the belief that some of us are not worthy of genuine care and concern. So an example of shining a light on a difficult truth is the idea of white privilege. Some people, mainly white people, balk at the use of that word. Even people who sort of more or less agree with the concept balk at it a little bit because there are certainly a lot of white people who wouldn't say that they grew up in privilege of any kind, the way we usually talk about it. But there is, and this is a very accurate way of saying it, comparative unearned advantage for being white in our society. And John Powell, my dear friend, who's at the Haas Center at Berkeley, if you haven't read John's things, I would say go read his stuff. He has given this example. He said, if Martha's being held down by 5 ropes, and he's African-American man, is being held down, I'm being held down by 10 ropes, and somebody comes around and feels like they want to address some of those barriers, and they cut 5 ropes for Martha and 5 ropes for me, I stand up. Martha stands up. But John doesn't, because he still has 5 ropes holding him down. And then people look and say, we took the ropes away. Martha stood up. What's wrong with you? Why can't you get up? So these realities are hard to see. And it's a difficult truth to embrace as a white person because we feel guilt and we feel shame and we don't know what to do with this truth. And I'll say more on that in a couple of minutes. Another related truth that can be difficult to grasp is the truth of structural racism. It can be very easy to confound bigotry with racism. Bigotry is real. It's a personal thing that people do. It's harmful. It is a result of racism, and it also feeds into racism, but it's not the same thing as racism. Racism is systemic. It happens when the myth of race and the myth of superiority shape our laws and our practices and our cultures. It shows up everywhere we are. It shows up in our news. It shows up in our entertainment industry. It's like the air we breathe. If you have not seen the film, Race, the Power of an Illusion, I highly recommend it. California Newsreel. Beverly Tato, the president of Spelman, has said that systems that lead to unfair advantage are like moving sidewalks in an airport. If you stand still, they'll keep taking you to the same place. You don't have to be complicit. You don't even have to work with it. You just stand there. It takes you there. That's like systems of structural racism. For white people, it can be really difficult to even notice we're on the moving sidewalk. They just think that's the way things are. So, and here's where it connects back to lies, because this kind of system reinforces lies. It reinforces lies of superiority and inferiority based on this mythical thing called race. So for whites, this can lead, if we're not careful and we're not looking for the truth, it can lead to internalized superiority. For people of color, it can lead to internalized oppression. Whoever we are, it's easy to believe the lies. We're people. It's human psychology. This is why, still in 2013, when little girls of color are asked to choose the doll they want to play with, 4 out of 5 times, they choose the white doll. And when asked why, they say, because it's the pretty one. Still, in 2013. That is internalized oppression at the age of 4. We have to call out lies, and we have to speak the truth. The third signpost for our journey says that we have to pay attention to how systems work. We can't change things if we don't understand systems. And this is where we get to be a little bit like rocket scientists, right? So we have to learn, we have to figure out how systems work. So a lot of times in our political culture, we learn somehow that what we accomplished is due all to our great hard work, right? And if we didn't get someplace, it must be because we didn't work hard enough, or we weren't smart enough, or all those things. Without realizing all the systems and people that we've benefited from or have been held back by. So here's an indicator for you when you need to pay attention to systems. If you look at something, and I'm going to talk about the poverty statistics in Lynchburg, if you look at it and you see disparities between groups of people, here's where one group ended up, here's where another group ended up, you should immediately think systems. What systems are in place to lead to these different outcomes? Because there's nothing different about people. Remember, race is a myth. You can't look at us under the microscope and say, these folks are black folks and these folks are white folks. You can't do that. There's no biological distinction that would predict those differences, so there's got to be systems that's leading to those differences. We have to look at the root causes. So looking at root causes is a key ingredient to figure